They erased her, scrubbed her from every database, deleted her records, wiped her name off the books like she never existed. Evelyn Carter, once the military's most lethal sniper, was reduced to a ghost, forgotten, disavowed, buried under layers of classified silence, until one day she stepped onto America's most elite shooting range. No fanfare, no sponsors, no high-tech gear, just a battered rifle, a steady hand, and a fire that hadn't died. It had been waiting. They laughed at her, called her outdated, mocked her like she was a relic from a forgotten war. But when she pulled that trigger, the silence that followed was louder than any explosion, because in that moment, they realized something terrifying. They didn't humiliate her. They reawakened her. What followed wasn't a comeback. It was a reckoning. Evelyn didn't just outperform billion-dollar weapon systems. She exposed a hidden network of corruption, betrayal, and silence that stretched all the way to the top of the government. They tried to bury her. But Evelyn Carter doesn't stay buried. She rises. And when she does, people fall. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, because this isn't just a story. It's a warning, and it's only just begun. The night air over Arlington carried nothing but silence. No traffic, no voices, just the soft rustling of dry leaves along the ridge where Evelyn Carter lay motionless, locked onto her target 2 miles away. In the crosshairs of her old Winchester rifle, the Maddox estate glowed like a fortress built on arrogance. She had mapped every inch of it over the past few weeks. There was no margin for error. She knew the rotation of every guard. She had timed the pattern of every searchlight. She had tracked how long it took each patrol to make a full lap. Garrett Maddox, the man behind it all, had spent a fortune convincing the world he was untouchable. She was here to remind him he was not. Evelyn adjusted the elevation dial. The wind had dropped to nothing. Her breathing slowed. She knew what this shot would trigger. It was never about damage. It was about memory. 15 years ago, this man took everything from her. He had erased Black Echo. He had erased her, or at least he had tried. Now, as she locked in the shot on the small infrared camera hidden in his private garden, she knew he would recognize what this meant. That was the point. He needed to know someone had reached this far inside his walls. She didn't care about his money. She didn't care about the men guarding him. She cared that he remembered. She whispered to herself under her breath, "Let's see if you remember who I am." The rifle cracked once. Sharp, clean. The camera exploded in a small burst of shattered glass and sparks. 2 miles away, in Maddox's control room, alarms erupted. His head of security jumped from his seat, scrambling for the surveillance feed. Garrett Maddox was already moving, leaning in, eyes narrowing as the screen cut to static. "Talk to me," Maddox snapped. The guard stammered. "South Garden, camera 27, 2 clicks out." Maddox didn't blink. "Find them. Find out how they got this close. Lock the estate down." He didn't need to ask who. He had seen this shot before. Only one person had ever made it, and she was supposed to be dead. Evelyn was already gone. She slid down the ridge, packed the rifle with practiced precision, and disappeared into the trees. Her old pickup waited under a rusted sheet of tin beside an abandoned barn. No lights, no sound. She drove without hesitation, cutting through back roads she had memorized years ago. She had waited long enough for this moment. Garrett Maddox had built his empire on silence. He had buried the truth about what happened in Congo, about her team, about who she really was. But he had made one mistake. He had let her walk back into his world without finishing the job. 2 weeks earlier, Evelyn had walked through the glass doors of Precision Elite, standing out like a shadow in a room full of polished egos. It was supposed to be for her niece, Rachel, who had begged her to come. Rachel wanted to write a story about gun culture, privilege, and the way elite spaces locked out people who didn't look or sound like they belonged. Evelyn had agreed, thinking she could stand in the background unnoticed. She had underestimated Maddox. He had seen her that day. Not just the old woman with a worn leather rifle case. He had recognized the way she moved, the way her hands never trembled, the way she scanned the room like a soldier walking into a kill zone. He had known. And, like the predator he had always been, he had baited the trap in plain sight. The crowd had laughed. Cameras had recorded every second. They had handed her a faulty rifle designed to humiliate her on live feeds watched by thousands. The old woman who didn't belong. The perfect joke. She had let them laugh. She had let Maddox believe he had won. But that day, she had studied more than the rifle. She had studied him, his posture, his security, his overconfidence. He had forgotten what it felt like to be hunted. She had not. That shot tonight was never about the camera. It was about turning the spotlight back on him. As she approached her safe house on the edge of Arlington, the street lights flickered in the distance. The world slept, unaware that one of its deadliest soldiers had just come back to life. She killed the engine and stepped inside. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen of her laptop. Her face tightened the moment Evelyn closed the door behind her. "You fired, didn't you?" Rachel's voice was flat, like she already knew the answer. Evelyn didn't waste time with explanations. She moved past her, pouring a glass of water with hands that didn't shake. Rachel stood, stepping into her path. "You made your move. What now?" Evelyn set the glass down without drinking. She looked out the window, eyes tracing the dark horizon. She didn't need to explain it to Rachel. Not yet. She had bigger things to finish first. Now we go back to where it started. The entrance to Precision Elite felt more like a luxury car showroom than a shooting range. Glass walls stretched 3 stories high, reflecting sunlight off polished steel beams. Inside, the lobby buzzed with voices. Men in tailored suits, women in designer jackets, security contractors with earpieces tucked discreetly under their collars. The air carried the scent of leather, oil, and money. Evelyn Carter walked in with Rachel at her side, drawing more than a few sideways glances. They didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Rachel leaned in, whispering under her breath, "We don't have to stay long. I just need a few quotes." Evelyn nodded without breaking stride. She kept her hands loose at her sides, moving the way she had been trained to move. Unremarkable, but alert. They had barely crossed the lounge when Garrett Maddox made his entrance. He walked like he owned the place, because in many ways he did. His name was on the sponsorship wall. His company's logo was etched into the glass behind the reception desk. He smiled as he approached, wide and polished, the kind of smile that never touched his eyes. "Rachel Carter," he announced loudly enough for the nearby crowd to turn and listen. "Defense Weekly, right? I heard you were coming." Rachel kept her posture professional. "I appreciate you making the time, Mr. Maddox." Evelyn stayed silent. Maddox's gaze flicked toward her, pretending not to recognize her. "And you brought someone with you." Rachel straightened. "This is my aunt, Evelyn. She's an enthusiast." Maddox let out a small laugh, just loud enough for those around to hear. "An enthusiast, huh? Well, you're in for a treat." He waved them toward the glass doors leading to the premium range. "We're actually running a little demonstration today, showcasing some of our newer tech. Stick around. You might enjoy the show." Evelyn said nothing, following them through the checkpoint. She could feel the eyes on her back. Maddox knew exactly what he was doing. The range itself was more theater than training ground, a stadium of glass and chrome. Digital displays hung overhead, showing live feeds of every shooter's performance. The audience gathered on plush seats, drinks in hand, murmuring as the participants lined up. Maddox raised his voice to the crowd. "Before we begin, we have a special guest with us today, a veteran. Someone who knows a thing or two about firearms. Heads turned toward Evelyn. Rachel stiffened. Evelyn stayed perfectly still. Maddox gestured toward one of his staff. Bring out the classic. From behind a security door, a technician emerged, carrying a sleek black case. He set it down in front of Evelyn and opened it with a dramatic flourish. Inside was a modern rifle, branded with Maddox's company logo. Evelyn studied it without touching it. Something about it felt wrong. Maddox leaned closer. "We'd be honored if you'd do the first shot." His voice carried enough weight to leave no polite way out. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. Rachel touched Evelyn's arm. "You don't have to do this." Evelyn nodded once. She stepped forward, picking up the rifle with both hands. She ran her fingers along the barrel, feeling the weight. It was too light. The balance was off. She adjusted her grip, checking the scope. It was misaligned, deliberately. Maddox stood behind her, smiling for the cameras. "Whenever you're ready." Evelyn breathed steady, raised the rifle, and took the shot. The round missed the target completely. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Maddox stepped forward, clapping her on the back. "First-time nerves. Let's give her another shot." The technician handed her another round. She loaded it without hesitation, aimed again, and fired. Another miss, worse than the first. Laughter grew louder. Someone in the back shouted, "Get her a walker." Evelyn lowered the rifle, locking eyes with Maddox. He leaned in, dropping his voice so only she could hear. "Welcome back to the big leagues." She placed the rifle back in the case, turned to the crowd, and nodded politely. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, her voice carrying just enough strength to quiet the laughter for a beat. Maddox waved her off, soaking in the attention. "Let's give her a round of applause for showing us all how it's done." Cameras flashed, phones recorded. By the time Evelyn and Rachel reached the lobby, the first clips had already hit social media. Headlines lit up. "Veteran misses every shot at elite range." "Grandma with a gun becomes meme sensation." Rachel paced, her face burning. "He set you up. That rifle was rigged." Evelyn didn't respond. She kept walking toward the exit. Rachel caught up. "Why didn't you call him out? Why didn't you say something?" Evelyn kept her eyes on the parking lot ahead. "Because this isn't over." Rachel grabbed her arm, forcing her to stop. "What aren't you telling me?" Evelyn finally turned, her face unreadable. "You want your story? You'll get it, but you better be ready for the truth." Rachel sat cross-legged on the floor in Evelyn's living room, her laptop glowing in the dark. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but she didn't move. She had been digging for hours, searching through every military database she could access, every archived article, every obscure forum. Nothing lined up. Evelyn Carter's name existed, sure. Basic enlistment records, a few duty assignments, and an honorable discharge listed under logistics and supply. No combat history, no awards, no special units. A 20-year service record that said absolutely nothing. It was too clean, too empty. Rachel leaned back, staring at the screen. It didn't make sense. Her aunt had moved like someone who had spent years on the other side of the world. The way she had handled that rifle, the way she had stayed calm when the cameras were pointed at her. None of it matched what these files claimed. She opened another tab, pulling up military forums known for whistleblower threads. She searched for anyone who might have crossed paths with Evelyn. Nothing. She tried combinations of her aunt's name with different military units. Nothing. She rubbed her face, frustrated. Evelyn had gone to bed hours ago, leaving Rachel to chase shadows. But the questions wouldn't stop. She had grown up hearing small pieces of her aunt's story. Family cookouts, whispered mentions of service in the army. But no one had ever said much beyond that. Evelyn had retired, moved into this small house, and built a quiet life. Or so Rachel thought. After another hour of digging, Rachel clicked into a cached page of an old veteran's message board. Most of the posts had been archived or deleted, but one thread caught her eye. The title read, "Black Echo, Myth or Buried Truth." She clicked it open. There were only 2 posts. The first was a question asking if anyone had ever heard of a unit called Black Echo, supposedly active in the early 2000s. The second was a single reply, "Doesn't exist. Forget you heard it." Rachel leaned forward, heart pounding. She typed the name again in the military archive search bar. Nothing. She tried civilian search engines. Nothing. She tried black ops, shadow units, off-book deployments. Nothing. She sat back, staring at the screen. Her aunt wasn't in any official record, but this name, it felt like a thread worth pulling. She closed the laptop and stood, walking down the hall toward Evelyn's room. The door was slightly open. Evelyn sat at the edge of the bed, staring out the window. Rachel paused in the doorway. "I checked everything I could. It's like you were never there." Evelyn didn't turn around. "That's the point, Rachel. They made sure of that." Rachel stepped inside, shutting the door softly behind her. "Who did? What are you not telling me?" Evelyn stood slowly, moving to the nightstand. She opened the drawer and pulled out a small, worn envelope. She held it out without a word. Rachel took it and carefully slid out an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local Girl Stuns County Shooting Competition." A black and white photo showed a teenage Evelyn holding a small trophy, her face serious. Rachel glanced up. "What is this?" Evelyn sat back down on the bed. That was the day everything changed. After that competition, a man approached me, said I had a gift, said the Army could use someone like me. Rachel sat beside her. "So, you enlisted?" Evelyn nodded. "Not right away. I kept the card in my pocket for months, but I knew what life had to offer me here. I knew where I'd end up if I stayed, so I called." Rachel looked down at the clipping again. "But all the records say you worked supply, logistics. You were never listed as combat." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Because they rewrote my history." Rachel's breath caught. "Black Echo?" Evelyn finally turned to face her fully, her voice low but steady. "It wasn't supposed to exist. We weren't supposed to exist. We were built to do the missions no one wanted to admit happened. No paperwork, no public record. They used us until we became a problem, then they erased us." Rachel tried to process what she was hearing. Why would they do that? Evelyn shook her head slowly. Because acknowledging us would have meant admitting that the military had women, people of color, operating in roles they weren't ready to admit existed. We were too inconvenient. Rachel stood and started pacing. "So, everything, the clean record, the lack of detail, it was all part of covering up Black Echo?" Evelyn nodded again, slower this time. "We were never meant to come home and tell our stories. We were tools, disposable when the mission ended." Rachel stopped, turning to face her. "If they erased all of it, how do I find the truth?" Evelyn stood again, moving toward the door. "You start where every lie leaves a crack. Look for what's missing. Look for what they tried to bury." Rachel grabbed her laptop and headed back to the table, determination setting in. She had the name. Now she had the confirmation. She was going to pull until something broke. Evelyn Carter never planned on leaving Mississippi. At 17, she had already accepted what life had to offer, a cycle of small-town work, family obligations, and the quiet understanding that girls like her did not go far. That changed the day she beat every man in Jefferson County at the annual shooting competition. The fairgrounds were packed with locals drinking beer, placing bets, and laughing at the sight of a teenage girl stepping up to the firing line with an old rifle. No one expected her to last past the first round. They stopped laughing after she hit 20 straight targets without missing. By the time she finished, the announcer could barely hide his disbelief when he read her name as the first-place winner. She remembered the silence that followed. Some clapped, most stood in stunned disbelief. Evelyn had walked off the stage that day with nothing more than a small trophy and a quiet smile. She thought it would end there. It didn't. The man approached her as she packed up her gear behind the concession stand. He wore civilian clothes, but his posture screamed military. Straight back, squared shoulders, eyes that missed nothing. He introduced himself as Captain James Ward, said he worked for a special recruitment program. He told her he had been watching the competition, told her she had a gift. He handed her a card with a number written on the back, no unit name, no official title, just his name and a phone number. She slipped the card into her pocket and said nothing. For weeks she ignored it, but every night, when the house grew quiet, she found herself reading the name again and again. By the end of summer, she made the call. The voice on the other end gave her a date and a location, no other details. It felt like a mistake, but something inside her said it was the only door she was ever going to get. She showed up 2 weeks later at an abandoned train yard 2 towns over. 5 men stood waiting, all older, all bigger, all carrying military duffel bags. She thought she had the wrong place until Captain Ward stepped out of the shadows. He nodded to her like he had expected her all along. What followed was months of training she could never speak about. No uniforms, no official ranks, no paperwork. Everything they learned in silence. Close quarters combat, long-range shooting, survival in hostile environments. They called themselves Black Echo. No one outside that team ever spoke the name. There were no records, no recognition, no medals. The government denied the unit's existence. They operated in shadows, cleaning up messes too messy for the headlines. That was the deal. No glory, no identity, no life outside the mission. Evelyn accepted it all. She learned to move like a ghost, to shoot with the kind of precision most soldiers never reached. They taught her how to erase her own tracks, how to leave no evidence she had ever been there. She became someone the world would never know. The first mission came 6 months later, a hostage extraction in Eastern Europe. The team inserted under complete blackout conditions. No backup, no communications. They got the hostages out alive, but one of their own didn't make it. The body was left behind. No funeral, no name listed on any wall, just gone. Evelyn learned that night what it really meant to be erased. She stayed because walking away meant letting someone else carry the weight. She stayed because she was good at it. Too good. The missions kept coming. Central America, the Middle East, Africa. No two were the same, but every one of them was off the books. By the time she was 25, she had done things she would never admit to anyone, things the government would deny ever happened, and she had done them all in silence. 15 years later, when the unit was suddenly shut down and scattered, she accepted the fake paperwork they handed her. Logistics, supply, a neat, quiet career on paper, a life that never existed. They told her to go home, pretend none of it ever happened. She had tried. For years she had tried, until Maddox showed up again, until Rachel brought her back into the light. She thought she had buried that part of herself, but the truth never stayed buried for long. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her laptop again. She didn't know any of this yet. She was still digging, still chasing whatever crumbs the system had left behind. Evelyn watched from the hallway, knowing what came next. Rachel froze suddenly, her face tightening. Evelyn stepped closer. "What is it?" Rachel turned the screen toward her. An anonymous message had appeared in one of the military forums she had been following. No sender, no timestamp, just 5 words. "Whisper lives. They all know." Evelyn's stomach tightened. Rachel's voice cracked the silence. Whose whisper? Evelyn already knew. She had always known. It was the name they whispered in the field. The name enemies feared but never saw. The name they had tried to bury with her records. Whisper was the name they had given her. The hunter had just become the hunted again. The message stayed on the screen longer than it should have. Rachel kept reading it over and over again, as if more words might appear if she stared hard enough. Evelyn stood frozen in the hallway, watching her niece process something she had spent years trying to forget. Whisper lives, they all know. Rachel slowly turned toward her aunt, waiting for some kind of confirmation, but Evelyn walked away without a word. She moved to the kitchen, grabbed her jacket, and checked the locks on every window without explanation. Rachel followed. Who sent that? Evelyn ignored her. She pulled a duffel bag from the closet and started packing without looking back. Rachel raised her voice. You know who sent that. You know what it means. Evelyn finally stopped, turning to face her, her expression cold and sharp. It means someone wants us to know they're watching. Rachel's voice dropped. Who's watching? Evelyn didn't answer. She zipped the bag and grabbed her keys. Rachel grabbed her laptop and tried to keep up as they headed out the door. She had never seen Evelyn like this, calculated, cold, and moving like every second counted. They reached the truck, but before Evelyn could start the engine, Rachel's phone vibrated in her hand. One new message. No sender, no subject, just a single attachment. Rachel's hands trembled as she opened it. A grainy photo filled the screen. Evelyn, in military gear, rifle slung across her back, standing in front of a burning compound. She held a child in her arms. The timestamp read 2004, Afghanistan. Rachel turned the screen toward her aunt. Evelyn's breath hitched. She reached for the phone, scanning every pixel of the image. This wasn't just any photo. This was from a mission that never officially happened. She knew exactly where and when it was taken. Kandahar, 2004. An extraction gone wrong. Classified. Buried. She stared at the photo in disbelief. Someone had held on to this for years. Someone wanted them to see it now. Rachel leaned in. Who sent this? Evelyn's grip tightened around the phone. No one who wants to help. Across town, Garrett Maddox stood in his office, replaying the footage of Evelyn's viral failure at the range. He froze the frame on her face. Zoom in, he ordered his security chief. The man obeyed, pulling up facial recognition software. The system struggled to confirm the match. Maddox leaned over the screen, narrowing his eyes. Try military archives. Black Echo program. Whisper. The security chief shifted uncomfortably. Sir, those files are sealed by Pentagon directive. We'd need authorization. Maddox snapped. I didn't ask if it was authorized. Run it again. The system processed for several minutes. No direct match. No file access. Maddox cursed under his breath. He turned away, pacing. She's alive. I know it's her. The security chief hesitated. Do you want to put a tail on her? Maddox nodded without turning back. Not just a tail. I want a location, movement patterns, and a full psychological profile. She made me look like a fool once. It won't happen again. The security chief left to carry out the order while Maddox returned to the frozen frame. He tapped his finger against Evelyn's face on the screen. You should have stayed dead. Back at the house, Evelyn's instincts kicked in. She scanned the street. The same dark sedan had been parked across the road since earlier that day. No movement, no lights, but she knew they weren't alone. She dropped the phone in Rachel's lap and started the engine. Get down, she ordered. Rachel obeyed, sliding low in her seat as Evelyn pulled out without headlights. She drove slow at first, watching the mirrors. The sedan followed. Evelyn gritted her teeth, turning onto a side road, then another. The sedan stayed close, but not aggressive. Whoever was tailing them knew what they were doing. Evelyn picked up speed, cutting through back streets, testing the driver behind her. Rachel sat up, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" Evelyn kept her eyes on the road. "They found us." She turned sharply onto a service road, tires skidding on loose gravel. The sedan closed the distance. Evelyn floored the accelerator, swerving onto an unlit highway ramp. The sedan stayed with them. Rachel grabbed the dashboard, heart racing. Who are they? Evelyn glanced in the mirror. Maddox's people, or worse. She cut the headlights completely, relying on the pale glow of the moon to navigate. The sedan hesitated, losing visual contact. Evelyn took the next exit, doubling back toward an old industrial yard. She killed the engine, pulling behind a rusted shipping container. They waited in silence as the sedan sped past, unaware they had slipped away. Rachel let out a shaky breath. Evelyn didn't move. She pulled out an old burner phone from the glove box, something she hadn't touched in years. She scrolled through the contacts until she found the one name she never expected to need again. Marcus Reed, Ranger, her old spotter, one of the few people she trusted to still be alive. She hit dial, her voice steady when he answered. "We need to meet. Now." The mountain cabin sat deep in the trees, barely visible from the old dirt road that wound through the forest. No one would find them out here unless they already knew it existed. Evelyn had secured the perimeter twice before she let Rachel step out of the truck. The girl had stayed quiet the entire drive, clutching her laptop to her chest like it was a shield. She had never seen Evelyn move like this before, methodical and alert, scanning every shadow as if she expected the trees themselves to attack. They carried their bags inside without turning on the lights. Evelyn bolted the door and pulled the blackout curtains tight. Rachel set her laptop on the table and stood awkwardly near the window. "How long do we stay here?" Evelyn checked her watch. "Until he gets here." Rachel swallowed hard. "He? Who's coming?" Evelyn didn't answer. She moved to the small kitchen, filled a kettle with water, and set it on the old gas stove. They waited in silence, the tension thick. 20 minutes later, headlights flashed once through the trees, then disappeared. Evelyn didn't flinch. She walked to the door and unlocked it. A man stepped inside without a word. He was older than Rachel expected, lean but solid, carrying himself like someone who had spent too many years in places no one talked about. His eyes locked on Evelyn first, a flicker of recognition passing between them. "Ranger?" Evelyn said quietly. Marcus Reed nodded. He looked at Rachel next, studying her for a long moment before setting his bag on the floor. "So, this is the journalist." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not just a journalist. I'm her family." Marcus let out a dry laugh. "Family's exactly why you're here." Evelyn shot him a look. "Say it?" Marcus leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You think this is about your little article? You think you stumbled into this on your own?" He shook his head. "You've been on Maddox's radar since the moment you filed for press clearance at Precision Elite." Rachel frowned. "What are you talking about?" Marcus glanced at Evelyn, then back to Rachel. "He let you in. He needed a reason to pull her out of the dark. You were that reason." Rachel's face drained of color. "He used me?" Marcus nodded. "He used you to bait her. And it worked." Rachel's voice cracked. "I didn't know." Evelyn stepped between them. "She didn't ask for this." Marcus uncrossed his arms, stepping closer. "None of us did, but here we are." Rachel backed away, her breath catching. "So what now? We just hide here forever?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, we don't hide. We fight." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You planning on marching back into that fortress?" Evelyn moved to the table, pulling out an old notebook. She flipped it open to a map of the Maddox estate. "No, we fight on our terms." Rachel swallowed. "How?" Evelyn tapped the notebook. "We tell the story." Marcus let out another dry laugh. "They'll kill it before it ever reaches the public." Evelyn looked at Rachel. "Not if it's fiction." Rachel's brow furrowed. "Fiction?" Evelyn nodded. "You write it like it's a novel. Whisper in the Wind, a story about a black ops sniper who never officially existed. Change the names, change the dates, let them think it's just a conspiracy theory. Marcus leaned forward. That's risky. Evelyn's voice was steady. It's the only way to control the narrative without painting a target on every surviving member of Black Echo. Rachel's mind raced. But I'd have to release it fast, get it online before they shut it down. Evelyn nodded again. You start tonight. Rachel looked down at her laptop, her fingers tightening around the edges. She had come here for a story. She hadn't expected it to be hers. She sat down at the table, opened a blank document, and typed the title, Whisper in the Wind. The sound of the keys echoed through the cabin like the first strike of a match. Marcus watched silently, then stood and moved to the window, scanning the dark trees outside. He didn't trust quiet places. They never stayed quiet for long. Evelyn sat across from Rachel, her eyes hard. Start with the truth. Let them figure out the rest. The kettle hissed softly in the background, steam rising in thin curls. Rachel took a breath and started typing. She had no idea if this would work, but it was the only move they had left. Across town, in a dark surveillance van, Maddox's security team watched the cabin through long-range lenses. One of them adjusted his headset. She's got help. The man beside him nodded. We wait for the order. In Maddox's office, the phone rang. He picked it up without looking. The voice on the other end was cold. They've made contact. Maddox leaned back in his chair, smiling. Perfect. Rachel's fingers barely left the keyboard for 2 straight days. The cabin lights stayed off, the curtains stayed drawn, and the only sound filling the air was the steady clatter of keys. She didn't write it like an article. She wrote it like a novel. Names changed, dates blurred, places shifted just enough to give the whole thing the appearance of fiction. But anyone who had ever served, anyone who had ever seen the way real operations work, would recognize the truth buried between the lines. She called it Whisper in the Wind, a story about a black ops unit that officially never existed, a sniper who left no record, and a betrayal that stretched to the highest levels of power. She included the impossible shots, the silent missions, the operation in Congo that had gone sideways. She described the unnamed executive who had manipulated intelligence, left civilians to die, and buried the team that had tried to stop it. She left breadcrumbs only insiders would understand. When the last word was typed, Rachel leaned back and exhaled. Marcus stood at the window, scanning the tree line with his rifle strapped to his chest. Evelyn sat across the room, silent, watching the glow of the laptop screen as if she already knew what was coming. Rachel uploaded the manuscript to 3 independent publishers that specialized in conspiracy fiction. Within 24 hours, the first digital copies hit underground forums. The spread was slow at first. A few comments, a few shares. Then the veterans found it. Anonymous posts started flooding the boards. Men and women who had served in places they had never been allowed to admit. Comments like, I saw this in Kandahar. I heard this name whispered in Baghdad. This explains what they shut down after Somalia. The story picked up speed. Former soldiers posted vague confirmations. Retired officers hinted at similar operations. Military blogs started dissecting the book line by line, drawing parallels to real events. Screenshots filled chat groups. Podcasts picked up the story. It spread like wildfire through the defense community. That was when Maddox moved. He called his communications team into an emergency meeting. The room filled with media strategists, legal advisors, and PR consultants. Maddox paced in front of them, holding a printed copy of the leaked story. I want this crushed, he snapped. Every platform, every channel, every outlet. Discredit the author, discredit the story, discredit anyone who dares mention it. His communications director swallowed hard. Sir, it's already viral in military circles. Retired generals are commenting on it. If we hit back too hard, we risk confirming it's real." Maddox turned, slamming his fist on the table. "Then frame it as stolen valor. Call it military fiction designed to manipulate veterans. Push stories that the author fabricated it for clicks and money. Make them doubt their own memories if you have to." The team nodded reluctantly. The campaign launched within hours. Articles flooded social media calling Whisper in the Wind a hoax. Paid experts appeared on news segments labeling it dangerous misinformation. Fake veterans were paraded across platforms claiming the story was an insult to real soldiers. Maddox made personal statements to the press, framing Evelyn as a fraud, a woman exploiting the military for attention. Footage from Precision Elite was recirculated, showing her failed shots, painting her as a joke. Hashtags trended. "Hia fake sniper," "Hia stolen valor." The smear campaign worked on the surface. Mainstream outlets started backing away. Public conversation shifted. But in private channels, the story only grew stronger. The people who knew the truth recognized the tactics. They had seen this before. The more Maddox denied, the more credible the story became among the military community. Veterans kept posting. Whisper lived. Evelyn watched it all unfold from the cabin, her jaw tight as Rachel read out the headlines. Marcus stood at the door, shaking his head. "He's scared." Evelyn nodded. "Good. He should be." Rachel slammed the laptop shut. "So what now? He's winning the media war." Evelyn stood, grabbed her rifle, and checked the chamber. "We show him what real fear looks like." Marcus frowned. "You're not thinking about going after him now." Evelyn turned toward the door. "Not him. His toy." Rachel blinked. "Or a 7? Evelyn nodded. "I need to know what it can do. I need to see it up close." Marcus grabbed his gear without hesitation. Rachel stood frozen, unsure whether to follow. Evelyn looked back once. "Stay here. Watch the feeds. We'll send you a signal when we're clear." Rachel swallowed hard, but nodded. She had done her part. Now it was their turn. The hunters were moving. Evelyn Carter moved through the tree line like a shadow. Every step measured, every breath controlled. The forest was dense enough to keep her hidden, but she knew better than to rely on cover alone. Somewhere above the canopy, Aura 7 hunted. The drone was silent, floating on anti-vibration tech that made it nearly impossible to hear until it was already locked onto you. Maddox had unleashed it hours ago after the leak of Whisper in the Wind sent his empire into a tailspin. This was his next move, Field, testing his machine against the one person he couldn't afford to let walk away. Evelyn knew she was the target. She wanted it that way. Marcus Reed trailed 50 yards behind her, covering angles, his rifle at the ready, but this wasn't a job for him. This was personal. Evelyn stopped at a narrow clearing near a stream. She crouched low, pulling out a small pulse sensor she had modified from medical equipment back at the cabin. She switched it on and tucked it under a pile of leaves in her jacket, adjusting the settings to mimic a human heartbeat. A few minutes later, the faint hum of a drone reached her ears. It floated into view just beyond the clearing, sensors scanning in every direction. Evelyn stayed perfectly still, pressing her body flat against the cold earth. She watched as Aura 7 hovered over the decoy, its targeting system locking onto the fake heartbeat. The drone adjusted its position, lining up for a shot. Evelyn didn't move. She studied the way it hovered, the way its sensors flared when it recalibrated. She noticed a split-second delay when switching targets, just long enough. She whispered into her comms. "Heartbeat trick worked. Confirming sensor lag. Estimated 4-second lock time before fire." Marcus's voice crackled softly in response. "Noted. You clear to move?" Evelyn stayed low as the drone fired at the decoy, shredding the jacket. It paused when no body fell, processors recalculating. That was her window. She slipped into the tree line and moved fast, circling behind the drone. From 10 yards away, she studied the body of the machine. She could see the seams where the armor plates connected, the small heat exhaust vents near the sensor array. She memorized every detail. This thing was fast, adaptive, and lethal, but it had physical limits, weak points, exposed hardware. Maddox had built something dangerous, but not invincible. She retreated into thicker woods before the drone recalibrated and began a wider search pattern. She and Marcus regrouped near an old utility road. "I've seen enough," she said. Marcus nodded. "You want to hit it now?" Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet. Maddox needs to know I'm ready to finish this." They made their way back toward the edge of the Maddox estate just before dawn. Security patrols moved like clockwork around the perimeter. Cameras panned slowly across the grounds. Evelyn and Marcus stayed outside the detection zone, but Evelyn had already picked her mark, the garden, the same spot where she had taken out the camera days earlier. She retrieved a single round from her pouch, polished brass, custom engraved. She pressed it into the soft dirt at the base of Garrett's prized rosebush, burying it just deep enough to stay hidden from plain sight. Next to it, she left a small piece of cloth, torn from her old military field jacket. Written on it, in bold black ink, was a single sentence. "I haven't even started." Marcus gave her a look as they pulled back. "You sure you want to push him this hard?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I want him angry. I want him sloppy." Back inside the estate, a gardener found the bullet and the cloth hours later while tending the roses. Maddox was called immediately. He stood over the spot, staring down at the message. His jaw clenched. He crushed the cloth in his fist and turned to his security chief. "Bring in the media team. Draft the statement. She wants this public? Fine. Let's make it public." That night, Maddox stood on stage at his corporate headquarters, cameras flashing, journalists packed shoulder to shoulder. Behind him, a massive banner displayed the words, "Veterans Honor Challenge," a live demonstration of Aura 7 versus the human sniper legend. His voice carried through the room like a hammer striking steel. "We have all heard the rumors, the stories, the so-called legend of a ghost sniper known only as Whisper. We've seen the lies spread across the internet, designed to undermine real service and real sacrifice." He paused, letting the cameras lock on his face. "Today, we issue an open challenge. One shot, one chance. Whisper versus Aura 7. Let the world see which one is real." The crowd erupted. Journalists scrambled to get their headlines out first. Social media feeds lit up. Hashtags trended worldwide. Whisper Challenge. Aura 7V's legend. Maddox knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just calling her out. He was baiting the trap on a global stage. Evelyn watched the announcement on Rachel's laptop from the cabin. She leaned back in her chair, her face unreadable. He took the bait. Rachel glanced nervously at Marcus, then back to Evelyn. "What do we do now?" Evelyn stood, picking up her rifle. "Now we accept." Evelyn Carter watched the press conference replay for the third time, every word from Garrett Maddox calculated and rehearsed. The man was playing the crowd like a seasoned politician, standing beneath bright lights, selling the world a story that made him the hero. The so-called Veterans Honor Challenge wasn't about honoring anyone. It was a public execution in disguise. He had positioned it as a fair contest, legend versus technology. But Evelyn knew better. He was baiting her into stepping into a controlled environment, one he owned from the floor to the ceiling. Rachel sat across from her at the cabin table, pulling up every article and post that had gone live since the announcement. The headlines were designed to trap the public just as tightly as the event was designed to trap Evelyn. Whisper, hero or hoax. Aura 7. Set to prove human limits are obsolete. Maddox challenges the myth to settle the score. The room felt smaller by the minute. Marcus Reed stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes scanning the dark woods outside. "He's already got the narrative locked down," he muttered. "People think you're showing up for a payday, not survival." Evelyn kept her face steady. "That's what he wants them to think. He wants them watching." Marcus turned toward her. "So, what's the move?" Evelyn leaned forward, spreading out the stolen blueprints of Red Point's testing facility. "He expects me to show up on his terms, stand in his spotlight, and give him his headline. But the real target isn't the drone. It's the archive." Rachel leaned in, her brow furrowing. "The surveillance bunker?" Evelyn nodded. "Everything Maddox covered up is sitting beneath that building. Every operation Black Echo ever ran. Every kill order. Every false report. If we get those tapes, we burn him to the ground." Marcus shook his head. "That place is a fortress. We don't have the numbers." Evelyn flipped to another page, showing the layout of the lower levels. "We don't need numbers. We need an inside man." Marcus pressed his lips together, reluctant. Rachel watched him carefully. "You know someone?" Marcus ran a hand over his face. "Brian Hayes, former security chief for Maddox. Used to run covert extraction ops before Maddox bought him out. He knows that bunker better than anyone." Evelyn sat back, measuring the risk. "Can we trust him?" Marcus didn't answer right away. "He owes me. Once." Rachel caught the hesitation. "But," Marcus sighed, "he's unpredictable. He got out years ago, started running his own playbook. If we bring him in, we put this whole thing in his hands." Evelyn stood. "Set the meeting." They didn't wait. Marcus made the call from a secure line in the basement of the cabin, using an old contact protocol only Hayes would recognize. The reply came in minutes. One word: midnight. An hour later, they pulled into a deserted truck stop off Route 17. The lot was empty, except for a single semi parked at the far end. Marcus stepped out first, scanning the area. Evelyn followed, her hand resting near the small pistol tucked inside her jacket. Rachel stayed in the truck, engine running, eyes locked on the door mirror. The man standing by the semi wore a worn leather jacket, ball cap pulled low, hands tucked casually in his pockets. He didn't move when they approached. "You look like hell, Ranger," Brian Hayes said without turning his head. Marcus stopped a few feet away. "We need your access." Brian finally turned, his face sharp with amusement. "That's a hell of an opener." Evelyn stepped beside Marcus. "You know why we're here." Brian's eyes flicked to her, recognition flashing in an instant. "So, the ghost really does walk." Evelyn didn't blink. "We need the archive." Brian chuckled, shaking his head. "You people never learn. That place is a coffin with lights. You walk in, you don't walk out." Marcus leaned in. "You owe me." Brian's smirk faded. He glanced toward the highway, checking the horizon. "You're not the only one planning to show up. Maddox has already hired a private kill team to clean up the mess. Full authorization. Live ammo. No witnesses." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "During the event?" Brian nodded. "Public enough to make you the villain. Private enough to bury you under security footage they control." Rachel's breath caught from inside the truck. She watched as Evelyn and Marcus stood stone-faced, processing the weight of the risk. Brian reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. "Access codes. Maintenance routes. You'll have 2 windows to hit the archive. After that, the whole place goes dark." Marcus took the drive without hesitation. "What's the catch?" Brian leaned closer, dropping his voice. "The moment you step in there, Maddox will trigger the failsafe. You won't just be fighting the drone, you'll be fighting every security protocol they've got." Evelyn stared him down. "Good. That's exactly what I want." Brian raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You always did have a death wish." Evelyn turned, heading back toward the truck without another word. Marcus followed. As they pulled back onto the highway, Rachel finally broke the silence. We're still doing this? Evelyn didn't even look back. We're doing this. Evelyn Carter didn't trust Brian Hayes. She never had. But when he showed up again the next night, slipping through the tree line behind the cabin without making a sound, she let him get close enough to speak. Marcus spotted him first, raising his rifle from behind the porch railing. But Evelyn waved him down. Brian stopped just inside the clearing, hands up, no weapon visible. His face was unreadable under the dim light of the cabin's back porch. "You're running out of time," he said flatly. Evelyn stood in the doorway, unmoved. "Say what you came to say." Brian stepped closer, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and holding it out without crossing the porch. Evelyn stayed where she was. "What's that supposed to be?" Brian's jaw flexed. "A copy of Maddox's latest bounty sheet. He doubled it this morning. 5 million wasn't enough. It's 10 now. Private channels only. No questions asked." Rachel stood behind Evelyn, her breath catching in her throat. Marcus lowered his rifle, but didn't move from his post. Evelyn stepped forward and took the paper. One look told her Brian wasn't lying. The hit was real. The payout had increased. Maddox had gone all in. "So why are you standing here?" she asked without flinching. "You could take that money and disappear." Brian shrugged. "I could, but I don't owe Maddox. I owe him." He nodded toward Marcus. Marcus scoffed. "That was a long time ago." "I don't forget," Brian replied. He stepped closer now, lowering his voice. "You saved my life in Caracas, Ranger. You didn't have to. We both know it." Marcus didn't answer. The memory was too heavy. Evelyn studied Brian's face, searching for the lie. She didn't find one. "And now?" she asked. Brian shifted his weight, glancing toward the dark woods like he expected someone to follow him. "I'm in. I'll help you breach the facility, but we do it my way. No hero stunts. No last stands. You get in, get the files, and get out before the whole place locks down." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "And what's in it for you?" Brian gave the smallest of smirks. "Nothing. Maybe I get to pay back what I owe. Maybe I just want to see Maddox burn." Evelyn let out a breath, every instinct screaming that this was a bad idea. But it was the only shot they had. She nodded once. "All right, you're in." Rachel stepped forward. "How do we do this without walking into a slaughter?" Brian pulled out a small tablet from his jacket and set it on the porch railing. A blueprint of the Red Point facility loaded on the screen. "I got clearance for 3 non-employee badges, media credentials. Maddox is counting on you showing up, so he'll let you through the front door. Cameras will be rolling. He needs the publicity." Brian pointed to a service corridor off the main exhibition floor. "Once you're inside, I'll trigger a controlled security breach at this location. It'll pull most of his private guards to the south wing, clearing your path to the bunker access elevator." Marcus leaned in, studying the map. "And the kill team?" Brian tapped another location deeper in the building. "They'll be staged here, waiting to lock down the archive once you enter. Maddox doesn't care if you find the tapes. He just needs you trapped long enough to kill you before you make it out with them." Evelyn's voice was ice. "He wants me to disappear on camera. Final proof his tech wins." Brian nodded. "Exactly." Rachel looked at Evelyn, her voice shaking. "Then why are we still doing this?" Evelyn closed the blueprint and looked up, her jaw set. "Because the world deserves to know the truth, no matter the cost." Brian reached into his jacket one last time and handed over 3 forged press credentials. "You walk in as journalists. Once you're through, I'll trigger the distraction. You'll have 10 minutes to reach the archive before the lockdown seals every exit." Marcus grabbed the badges, checking the names and photos. "We're gonna need more than 10 minutes." Brian gave a cold smile. "Then you better move fast." Evelyn nodded toward the truck. "Gear up. We leave in 1 hour." Rachel stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what they were about to do sinking in. Marcus gave her a look. "You still with us?" Rachel swallowed hard and nodded. "All the way." Evelyn grabbed her rifle and headed for the truck without another word. Brian followed, pulling up his hood as he disappeared into the darkness again. The trap had been set. Now it was their turn to spring it. The Red Point Technologies Weapons Expo was everything Garrett Maddox promised it would be. Loud, overhyped, and crawling with cameras. Media crews lined the glass entrance, shoving microphones into the faces of military brass, defense contractors, and politicians eager to be seen. The smell of money and power hung thick in the air. Inside the exhibition center, hundreds gathered to witness the public unveiling of Aura 7, Garrett's crowning achievement. Evelyn Carter watched it all from the edge of the security line, dressed in the same black tactical uniform as the rest of Maddox's private security team. The stolen ID badge clipped to her vest read Kendra Miles, a name ripped from a real employee who wouldn't live to know she'd been replaced. Evelyn moved with purpose, blending into the flow of guards patrolling the perimeter. No one gave her a second look. She kept her face down, her earpiece live, listening for the first signal from Brian Hayes. Behind the main stage, Marcus Reed slipped through a service corridor wearing the standard gray jumpsuit of a Red Point maintenance worker. His forged badge gave him clearance to move unnoticed through the lower levels. Every hallway had cameras, but Brian had looped the feeds just long enough for Marcus to bypass the checkpoints. He carried a small maintenance cart filled with equipment, tools on top, weapons underneath. He didn't look up as he passed two armed guards stationed near the freight elevator. They barely glanced at him. His heartbeat stayed steady. He had done this before, more times than he could count. He pressed the elevator button, waiting for the doors to open. Up on the main floor, Rachel Carter adjusted her glasses and clutched her camera bag as she moved with the swarm of journalists into the media pen. Her badge read Jennifer Carson, a name pulled from a fake defense blog. No one questioned her. Everyone was too focused on catching the best angle of Maddox standing on the center stage. Garrett played his part perfectly, smiling for the cameras, hyping the demonstration as a historic moment for defense technology. "Today, we show the world what happens when innovation meets precision," Maddox announced, his voice booming through the hall. Aura 7 is not just the future of warfare. It is the end of human error. The crowd applauded on cue. Rachel kept her camera steady, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced towards the far left of the stage where Evelyn now stood, pretending to monitor the audience. Their eyes met for half a second. No words, just a nod. Rachel shifted her position, angling herself toward the service corridor where Marcus was headed. She pressed her earpiece deeper, waiting for his voice. Deep underground, Marcus reached the archive level. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. He pushed the cart forward until he reached the reinforced door marked Archive Level 3, Authorized Personnel Only. He glanced at the security keypad. 6 digits. He entered the code Brian had provided. The light blinked red. Marcus froze. Tried again. Red. A chill ran down his spine. Brian's voice crackled in his ear. "I'm overriding the lock remotely. Hold position." Marcus kept his back to the wall, scanning both ends of the hallway. Seconds felt like hours. Above ground, Maddox continued his performance, explaining how RS7's new targeting system could identify and neutralize threats faster than any human soldier. The crowd ate it up. Rachel glanced at Evelyn again, catching a glimpse of tension in her jaw. Evelyn shifted her weight, her hand resting near her sidearm. She didn't trust this setup. Neither did Rachel. Suddenly, Marcus's voice came through the comms. "I'm in." Evelyn exhaled silently. The first wall had fallen. Maddox turned to the big screen behind him, signaling for the lights to dim. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Whisper Challenge begins." The crowd erupted in cheers. The clock had started. Marcus pushed through the door and stepped into the archive room. Rows of analog tapes lined the shelves, decades of black operations stored on reels no digital system could erase. He moved fast, scanning the labels until he reached the section marked Black Echo, 2002-2005. He pulled a small scanner from his cart and began digitizing the identifiers, preparing for extraction. His hands worked fast but steady. There was no turning back now. Evelyn pressed her comms deeper. "Rachel, status," Rachel whispered into her mic. "Maddox is about to start the demo. All cameras on him." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Stick to the plan. Marcus, secure those tapes. I'm heading to the south wing." She turned on her heel and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the stage behind. Maddox had no idea she was already inside his fortress. Marcus Reed moved deeper into the cold, silent bunker beneath Red Point Technologies. The air was heavy, almost stale, untouched by sunlight or fresh air for years. Rows of shelves lined with analog tape reels stretched across the massive underground chamber. No digital backups, no cloud storage, just physical proof locked away from the world. He pulled a small flashlight from his chest pocket and swept it across the labels. His breath caught when he spotted the section marked Black Echo Opes. The dates covered everything from 2002 to 2005. Marcus set his bag down and pulled out the portable scanner Brian had given him. It wasn't perfect, but it could capture the labels and metadata without moving the tapes. He worked fast, scanning row after row, documenting mission logs, operation codes, and field reports. Every reel told a story the government had spent years trying to erase. Then he saw it. A row marked Congo, sandstorm complete. His jaw tightened. This was the operation that had destroyed their unit. This was the file that proved Garrett Maddox had fed them false intelligence, sending Black Echo to eliminate the wrong target while protecting his real asset. Marcus pulled one of the reels off the shelf and examined the label. Confirmed CIA liaison. Maddox, G cross-reference, civilian casualties, 25 unarmed. His stomach turned. The official reports had listed those casualties as enemy combatants. Here, plain as day, was the truth they had all risked their lives to reveal. Marcus slid the reel into the old console Brian had mapped out for him. The machine whirred to life, reading the contents. He connected the scanner to the console and began transferring the footage. Back on the surface, Rachel Carter stood in the media pen, pretending to adjust her camera while keeping her earpiece pressed tight to her ear. She heard every click, every breath as Marcus worked in the bunker below. Her palms started to sweat. She wiped them on her pants and checked the media crew around her. No one seemed to notice that she wasn't filming the stage. Evelyn's voice cut in low. "Rachel, stay sharp. I'm moving into position." Rachel swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she watched Garrett Maddox hype up the crowd, dragging out every word like a showman selling the greatest performance of his life. He waved to the audience and gestured toward the sleek black drone hovering in a glass enclosure above the stage. "Aura 7, he announced proudly, "the most advanced autonomous targeting system on Earth." The crowd roared with approval. Evelyn slipped through the outer security ring, her stolen uniform still fooling everyone around her. She moved toward the right side of the stage where the private security team had set up a restricted perimeter. The stage lights flashed as Maddox launched into his final pitch. And now, as promised, the whisper challenge. Evelyn kept her head low, hand resting near the grip of her sidearm. Maddox turned toward the crowd, scanning the faces. Where is the legend herself? Is she brave enough to step forward, or has the myth already collapsed under the weight of truth? The cameras panned across the audience. Journalists whispered among themselves. Whispers spread through the media pen. Rachel's breath hitched. She glanced toward the back of the room. Evelyn didn't move. She stayed in the shadows, eyes locked on Maddox. Down in the bunker, Marcus watched the transfer bar inch toward completion. 90%, 95. The console's old fan sputtered as if it might die before the job finished. Marcus gritted his teeth, willing the machine to hold. The scanner beeped softly. Transfer complete. He pulled the device free, sealing it in a metal case lined with signal-blocking material. He reached for his earpiece. "It's done. I've got it." Rachel pressed her hand tighter to her ear. "Copy. Uploading now." She reached into her bag and pulled out a secure uplink device, connecting the data receiver Marcus had slipped her earlier. She tapped the screen, initiating a real-time upload to 3 secure servers. The screen flashed green. Upload in progress. Evelyn shifted slightly, her focus never leaving Maddox. "Rachel, how long?" Rachel glanced at the progress bar. 10 minutes. Evelyn's jaw clenched. "Hold your position. I'm going in." Maddox raised his arms to silence the crowd. "Let's settle this." Evelyn took a single step forward, slipping through the final checkpoint. The trap was closing fast. The lights dimmed across the expo hall as Garrett Maddox raised his arms toward the massive screen behind him. Spotlights beamed down, framing him like a conqueror on his throne. Aura 7 hovered above the stage in a glass containment rig, sleek and menacing, its weapon systems armed and on standby. Garrett's voice echoed across the building. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness what no human has ever achieved. Precision beyond instinct, power beyond skill, intelligence without flaw." The crowd roared, phones lifted high to record every second. Behind the barricades, Rachel Carter sat with her laptop open on her knees, shielded by the other media crews. The secure upload from the archive was still running. 80%, 90. She bit her lip, willing the signal to hold. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she checked her watch. Evelyn's voice cracked through her earpiece. "Status?" Rachel whispered back. "Almost there. Stand by." Garrett turned toward the display team at the control panel. "Begin the demonstration." The lead technician nodded and activated the live feed on the massive screen. A video simulation loaded, showing a digital recreation of forest terrain. A glowing red heat signature flickered across the image. Garrett's grin widened. "We've programmed Aura 7 with the profile of the most elusive sniper the military ever denied." Whisper. The crowd murmured louder now, the room buzzing with anticipation. Garrett leaned closer to the microphone. "Let's put the myth to rest." The technician entered the targeting sequence. Aura 7's sensors locked onto the simulation, its targeting system calculating in real time. The audience leaned in, holding their breath. That's when Rachel made her move. She hit execute on the second program Marcus had slipped onto her drive. The massive screen flickered, glitching for half a second. The tech team scrambled, tapping controls, confused by the sudden interruption. Garrett turned sharply toward them. "What's happening?" One technician's voice cracked. "System override. Someone's in the feed." Before they could pull the plug, the screen snapped to life again. But it wasn't the simulation. It was raw, unedited archive footage from the bunker. The room went silent as a grainy video filled the screen. The timestamp read, Congo, Sandstorm, 2005. The crowd watched in stunned silence as footage played of Garrett Maddox shaking hands with a foreign militia leader. Weapons crates were exchanged. Money changed hands. Children in ragged uniforms stood in the background holding rifles too large for their bodies. Garrett's face paled. "Shut it down," he barked. The tech team tried, but Rachel's hack had locked them out. The footage shifted again. Documents rolled across the screen. Official memos, mission briefings, falsified kill reports, all signed by Garrett Maddox. The audience gasped, voices rising. Journalists scrambled to capture the broadcast. Military officials stood frozen. On the floor, Rachel kept the feed rolling. The final blow hit when the footage showed a familiar sniper in desert camouflage providing cover for a group of children fleeing burning buildings. Evelyn's face, younger but unmistakable, filled the screen. Whispers broke into full-blown shouting. Garrett turned to flee but was cut off by security freezing in place, unsure whose orders to follow. Rachel watched him shove his way off the stage toward the private exit. She pressed her earpiece. He's running. North exit. Evelyn was already moving. She shoved through the security line, tearing off the stolen badge and drawing her sidearm. Maddox's guards scrambled to block her, but the chaos was spreading too fast. Audience members surged toward the stage, demanding answers. Reporters chased military officials down the aisles. Garrett sprinted for the emergency corridor, shoving a guard aside as he bolted through the door. Evelyn charged after him without hesitation. Behind her, Aura 7's systems flickered as if caught in the digital crossfire. The drone hovered, sensors recalibrating, but Evelyn had only one target now. Rachel packed her gear, heart racing as the crowd dissolved into shouting and confusion. She glanced toward the service exit where Evelyn had disappeared. She whispered into the comms, "I hope you catch him." Garrett Maddox barreled down the narrow emergency corridor, shoulder slamming into the crash bar on the far door. It burst open with a metallic clang that echoed through the concrete walls. His breath rasped in his throat as he staggered forward, clutching the encrypted tablet he had yanked from the control booth. Every step sounded heavier than the last, the noise behind him swelling into a riot as the crowd outside erupted over the leaked footage. He didn't dare look back. His carefully built empire was collapsing, but survival came first. If he could make it to the parking deck, he had a private convoy waiting. From there, he could vanish long enough to regroup, spin a counter-narrative, buy enough silence to stay in the game. He reached for the emergency elevator panel, stabbing the button with shaking fingers. No response. The power had been cut. Fury burned through him. He pivoted toward the stairwell instead, boots pounding down the steps. His earpiece crackled to life. "Sir, you need to move. We've lost control of the floor." Garrett barked back, "I'm already moving. Get RS7 online now. Deploy it to the north wing. Full authorization." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, there are still civilians? Do it now," Garrett roared. He kicked open the stairwell door and bolted into the next hallway, heading for the sub-level maintenance exit. That's when he saw her. Evelyn Carter stood dead center in the hallway, rifle raised, eyes locked on him with terrifying calm. She didn't shout, she didn't move, she didn't have to. Garrett skidded to a stop, breath catching in his throat. His security detail wasn't with him. He was alone. For the first time in years, he looked into the face of the one person he hadn't been able to erase. She took one step forward. "End of the line, Garrett." His mind raced. He weighed his odds. The drone. He still had the drone. He pressed the override on his tablet. A mechanical hum filled the air above them. Garrett's grin returned as Aura 7 descended into the hallway, weapon system locked, sensors glowing red. The barrel of its high-caliber railgun tracked Evelyn's chest. Garrett stepped back, confidence returning with every inch. "This is how it ends, Whisper. You die, I win. It's that simple." Evelyn didn't flinch. She kept her rifle lowered, eyes never leaving him. Garrett's finger hovered over the fire command. "Say goodbye." Evelyn's lips curled into a slight smile. "Let's see if you remember who I am." She spoke the next words with slow precision, her voice dropping into a cold command tone. "Aura 7, Echo Whisper 3, stand down." Garrett's smirk faltered. The drone's sensors flickered. The barrel shifted slightly. He jabbed the command again. "Terminate. Do it." The drone hesitated. Evelyn took a step closer. Aura 7. Confirm authentication. Echo Whisper 3. Override sequence initiate. The drone froze, systems visibly stalling, processors struggling to reconcile two conflicting orders. Garrett's face twisted in shock. "What the hell did you do?" Evelyn took another step forward, voice razor sharp. "I'm not done yet." The drone hovered mid-air, weapon systems flickering as its processors battled between Garrett's kill command and Evelyn's override. The hum of its engine filled the hallway, the barrel jerking slightly, unable to commit to a target. Garrett Maddox's hand shook on the tablet as he hammered the override again and again, his face twisted with fury. "Fire, damn it!" he snarled, voice cracking. Evelyn took another step forward, rifle still lowered, eyes locked on him like a predator stalking prey. "It won't fire on me, Garrett," she said low and steady, "because you didn't wipe the deep code. You rushed it. You skipped the failsafe you didn't even know was there." Garrett's face paled as the realization hit. She wasn't bluffing. She had baked a voice-locked protocol deep into the drone's command tree, one that no amount of code rewriting could erase without tearing down the entire system. She spoke again, tone like a hammer on steel. "Aura 7, full lockdown. Disable targeting. Enter passive mode." The drone's sensors flickered one last time, then powered down, weapons retracting with a mechanical hiss. The machine drifted upward into standby mode, lights going dark. Garrett staggered back, disbelief plastered across his face. No, you can't." Evelyn finally raised her rifle, training it on his chest. "Game's over." Garrett's face twisted into something between rage and panic. He lunged for the emergency door, but Evelyn moved faster. One precise shot shattered the lock inches from his head. He froze, hands up, breathing hard. The hallway behind them flooded with the sounds of footsteps and voices. Media crews had followed the noise. Cameras rounded the corner, lenses catching the scene from every angle. Journalists shouted over each other, "Is that Whisper? Is that Garrett Maddox? What's happening here?" Evelyn never took her eyes off him. She stepped closer, forcing him back toward the center of the corridor, toward the flashing cameras. "On your knees, Maddox," she ordered, voice carrying clear and sharp. Garrett's eyes darted toward the cameras, the swarm of reporters, the entire world watching. "You don't want to do this here," he hissed. Evelyn's jaw clenched. "This is exactly where I want it." Garrett hesitated, calculating a dozen moves he didn't have the power to make. Finally, he dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he raised them above his head. The cameras captured every second. Evelyn kept her rifle steady, stepping to his side and forcing him to face the wall. She reached for a zip tie from her belt, locking his wrists behind his back with brutal efficiency. Reporters surged forward, shouting for statements, flashing lights illuminating every inch of the corridor. Evelyn leaned down, her voice low but meant for the microphones. "This is Garrett Maddox. He's responsible for war crimes, conspiracy, and the cover-up of Black Echo. The proof is already public. The cameras caught every word." Garrett struggled, face contorted in rage. "You'll never hold me. You don't have enough." Evelyn stood tall, hauling him to his feet. "I have everything I need." Behind her, Marcus appeared, holding the secured data case with the archive files. Rachel followed close, recording everything on her phone. FBI agents pushed through the crowd seconds later, flashing badges and clearing a path. Evelyn shoved Garrett into their custody, stepping back as they restrained him. She handed the lead agent the secured data. "This is everything. You'll find the rest in the bunker beneath this facility." The agent nodded, locking eyes with her. "We've got it from here." Evelyn exhaled slowly, lowering her rifle. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. Rachel stood beside them, staring as the cameras zoomed in on Garrett being hauled away. Evelyn turned toward the exit. Let's finish this. It started with headlines that ran for days. Garrett Maddox arrested on federal charges. Black Echo exposed. Congressional hearings announced. Every network carried the story. Reporters who once glorified Maddox now dissected his entire empire, digging through defense contracts, political donations, and overseas operations. Federal agents raided Redpoint Technologies within hours of his arrest, seizing hard drives, financial records, and internal memos. By the end of the week, his legal team was crumbling under the weight of the evidence Evelyn had handed over. The footage leaked from the expo was undeniable. The archived data matched military records long believed destroyed, and more veterans came forward one by one to confirm what the government had tried to erase. But the real reckoning came when the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee announced public hearings. It wasn't just about Maddox anymore. It was about accountability, about who in the government knew and who had helped bury the truth. Evelyn Carter sat quietly in a holding room just outside the hearing chamber, flanked by Marcus Reed and Rachel Carter. The air felt thick with tension, every second stretching longer than the last. A congressional aide entered, holding a clipboard. "They're ready for you." Evelyn stood without hesitation. Rachel touched her arm. "You don't have to carry all of this alone." Evelyn met her gaze. "I already have." She turned and walked toward the chamber doors. The room was packed. Senators seated in a semicircle, cameras stationed along the back wall, media crammed into every corner. Whispers rippled through the audience as Evelyn stepped to the witness table. Senator Lauren Bennett, chair of the committee, nodded toward her. "Please state your name for the record." Evelyn took a steady breath. "Evelyn Carter, formerly Master Sergeant, United States Army." Call sign whisper. The room fell silent. The cameras zoomed in. It was the first time she had publicly acknowledged what had only existed in rumor and classified files. Senator Bennett leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, do you understand that your testimony today is under oath and subject to penalty of perjury?" "I do." "Please tell this committee what Black Echo was." Evelyn didn't flinch. She told them everything. How Black Echo was formed as an unofficial unit of soldiers who didn't fit the traditional mold. Women, people of color, operators who were too skilled to ignore but too politically inconvenient to acknowledge. She described the missions: hostage rescues, intelligence gathering, silent eliminations of targets deemed too sensitive for official forces. She detailed the Congo operation, the falsified intel, the civilian deaths that had been blamed on her unit, and she named names. Garrett Maddox, the officers who had signed the purge orders, the chain of command that had approved it all. Senator Bennett let the silence hang before asking the next question. "Why come forward now?" Evelyn glanced toward the cameras. "Because they erased us. They erased what we did, what we sacrificed, and they did it to protect power, not people. The truth matters. Even if it comes too late for some of us, it still matters." The gallery broke into quiet murmurs. Senator Bennett nodded. "Thank you for your courage." The hearing continued for hours. More witnesses confirmed the details. Marcus testified next, adding his voice to the weight of the truth. Rachel's reporting was entered into the record. By the end of the week, the Senate introduced new legislation, the Ranger Act. It proposed legal protections for covert operatives like those in Black Echo, oversight reforms to prevent future abuses, and criminal penalties for government officials who knowingly suppressed evidence of war crimes. The committee scheduled a vote. Evelyn watched it unfold on the news back at the cabin, sitting beside Marcus and Rachel. The words felt surreal on the screen. For the first time in years, something was changing, and this time, it wasn't in the dark. Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You did it." Evelyn shook her head. We did it. Rachel looked toward the window, her voice soft. What happens if they pass it? Evelyn stood, grabbing her coat. Then maybe it's finally over. But deep down, she knew it never really would be. Not for her, not for the ones they had lost. Not until the last hidden war had a face. As the news anchor confirmed the vote was scheduled for Friday, Evelyn's expression didn't change. She just grabbed her keys and headed for the door. Let's see how this ends. The morning sky over Arlington was clear, the winter air crisp but dry. A long black cloth covered the newly constructed wall near Section 60, where the nation had buried soldiers lost in wars most civilians barely remembered. This wall was different. There were no ranks, no branches of service etched in polished black granite, just names and call signs. Ghosts who had lived in silence now carved into stone. Evelyn Carter stood near the edge of the gathering, her hands buried in the pockets of her coat, watching as more people arrived. She recognized some, former operatives, retired officers, old handlers who had worked behind the scenes. Others were strangers, families of the lost, reporters clutching notepads, soldiers in dress uniforms standing in tight formation. Senator Lauren Bennett stood near the front, flanked by high-ranking military officials. Across the pathway, Marcus Reed stood beside Rachel Carter, both scanning the crowd, searching for familiar faces. The ceremony was meant to be small, but word had spread. The world knew now what had been hidden for too long. Evelyn stayed back as the speeches began. A chaplain spoke first, offering words about duty, sacrifice, and the invisible burdens carried by those who had no medals or parades. Senator Bennett took the podium next, her voice steady and clear. For decades, these names were never spoken outside classified briefings. Their actions were never printed in official reports. They served in the shadows, not for glory, but because their country asked them to. Today, that silence ends. She gestured toward the covered wall. Today, we honor the operators of Black Echo. The cloth was pulled free, revealing the engraved names. Evelyn's throat tightened as she scanned the stone. Maria Delgado, Cipher, James Wilson, Shadow, Eric Hayes, Brick, Thomas Reed, Ranger, and, last on the list, Evelyn Carter, Whisper. The crowd stood in reverent silence. A single bell tolled in the distance. Senator Bennett turned toward the gathered press. We stand here today, not only to remember these warriors, but to commit to never erasing the sacrifices of those who serve in silence again. The Ranger Act has been passed and signed into law, ensuring that no unit, no operator, will ever be denied recognition or protection because of politics. The crowd applauded softly. Marcus glanced toward Evelyn, motioning for her to come forward. She hesitated, then stepped into the open. Cameras shifted to capture her every move. Senator Bennett extended her hand. Miss Carter, would you do us the honor of placing the first wreath? Evelyn nodded, accepting the small memorial wreath wrapped in black and gold ribbon. She approached the wall, every step heavier than the last. She knelt slowly, placing the wreath beneath the names, her fingers brushing the stone. For a long moment, she stayed there, head bowed. When she stood, she turned toward the crowd. The cameras closed in. We didn't choose the shadows, she said softly, her voice carrying. But we stood there because someone had to. She glanced toward the names on the wall, and we carried that silence because we believed the mission mattered more than the recognition. Her voice hardened slightly. But truth matters too, and today they're finally seen. The crowd erupted into applause, louder this time. Evelyn stepped back as families approached the wall, some crying, some touching the names etched in stone. Marcus joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. They would have been proud. Evelyn nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Rachel moved in beside them, her camera hanging around her neck. The world finally knows Senator Bennett approached, waiting for the crowd to settle before speaking. "Miss Carter, I'd like to introduce you to someone." She stepped aside to reveal a tall woman in her early 30s wearing a Department of Defense badge. "This is Director Amanda Lewis. She oversees the new National Tactical Training Program." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Director Lewis smiled. "A program built to train the next generation of special operations candidates, especially those who don't fit the usual mold. We need instructors with real experience, someone who's lived what the books can't teach." Evelyn glanced toward Marcus, then Rachel. "You want me?" Lewis nodded. "If you're ready." Evelyn looked back at the wall one more time. The names seemed to stand taller in the morning light. She took a breath and turned back to Lewis. "I think I am." The wooden porch creaked softly under Evelyn Carter's boots as she leaned on the railing, staring out at the same patch of Mississippi land she had grown up on. The house had been falling apart when she returned, but with her back pay restored and the lawsuit settled, she had finally been able to rebuild it. The old place looked almost new again, but the air smelled the same: dirt, pine, and distant rain. Down by the fence, a row of tin cans sat lined up like soldiers. A girl no older than 12 stood 20 feet away, small hands gripping a worn .22 rifle. Her name was Mia Tucker, and she had been coming to Evelyn's community marksmanship program for 3 weeks. She wasn't the first. Evelyn had opened the program quietly. No press, no cameras, just a flyer on a church bulletin board and a few phone calls to old neighbors. Within days, kids started showing up, mostly black, mostly from families who couldn't afford fancy training or private clubs. Some had never even held a firearm. But they listened, they learned, and they came back every week. Mia lined up her sights, breathing shallow and quick. Evelyn watched from the porch, arms crossed, saying nothing. She knew better than to interrupt. The girl adjusted her stance, narrowed her eyes, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the late afternoon air, sending the far left can spinning off the fence post. Mia froze, staring at the result like she couldn't believe it. Evelyn smiled. She walked down the steps and crossed the yard slowly. The other kids gathered, waiting to see if Mia had done it right. Evelyn stopped beside her, glancing at the can on the ground. "What's the rule?" she asked quietly. Mia swallowed hard and recited in a steady voice, "A gun isn't a toy. It's a responsibility. You never point it at anything you don't intend to destroy." Evelyn nodded once. "Good." Mia looked up at her. "Did I do it right?" Evelyn leaned down, lowering her voice just enough for Mia to hear. "You did more than that. You paid attention. You respected the shot. That's what matters." Mia beamed. The other kids broke into applause, surrounding her like she had just won the Olympics. Evelyn stood back, letting them celebrate. Marcus had once told her the mission never really ended, it just changed shape. He had been right. Back on the porch, Rachel stood with her phone out, snapping a quick photo. Evelyn shot her a look. Rachel smirked. "Relax. No names, just the moment." Evelyn shook her head but didn't stop her. Across the country, the story of Whisper had taken on a life of its own. News outlets kept running follow-ups. Editorials debated the ethics of covert units. Veteran groups honored Black Echo at local memorials. A documentary team had already reached out twice. Evelyn had said no both times. She wasn't interested in reliving the war, not for ratings, not for headlines. But this small corner of Mississippi, where kids learned to breathe, aim, and respect every pull of the trigger. This was the only legacy that mattered. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, Evelyn glanced back toward the house. A stack of letters waited on her kitchen table. Requests from military training programs, law enforcement agencies, even a private security firm offering more money than she could spend in 5 lifetimes. She had turned them all down. She had found her place. Rachel leaned on the porch railing, watching the kids line up for another round. You know they're going to keep calling, right? Evelyn nodded. Let them. Rachel paused, glancing down at her phone. You're trending again. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. What now? Rachel read the headline aloud. From Ghosted Teacher. Whispers next mission begins. Evelyn exhaled a soft laugh, shaking her head. Let them write what they want. I'm right where I need to be. And with that, she turned back to the fence line, ready for the next shot. The federal courthouse in Washington stood like a stone fortress. Reporters stacked outside the front steps for hours, shoving microphones and cameras toward every official who dared walk past. Inside, Garrett Maddox sat at the defense table in a tailored gray suit, hands folded tightly in his lap, face pale but composed. He had shaved, cut his hair short again, trying to reclaim the image he once sold to the world. The decorated veteran, the corporate patriot, the untouchable strategist. But no polished image could erase what the world had already seen. The footage, the documents, the testimonies, the truth. The courtroom was packed. Senators, veterans, journalists, families who had lost sons and daughters in the shadows of operations Garrett had overseen. Evelyn Carter sat behind the prosecution table, not as a plaintiff, not as a witness today, but as a presence that no one could ignore. The first rows were filled with Black Echo families, people who had once believed their loved ones had died in training accidents or meaningless assignments. Now they knew the truth, and they had come to see justice served. The judge entered, gavel striking sharply. We are here to conclude United States versus Garrett Maddox. Garrett stood slowly as the clerk read the charges. Conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, war crimes under international law. The list went on. When asked how he pled, Garrett spoke clearly. Not guilty. A wave of disgust rippled through the courtroom. The evidence was overwhelming, but his legal team had tried to spin it for weeks, arguing technicalities, blaming rogue agents, denying Maddox had ever held final authority. None of it stuck. Evelyn watched silently as former Red Point employees testified. Veterans described missions gone wrong because of faulty intelligence. Black Echo operatives' families described being told their loved ones died in accidents that never happened. Then came the prosecution's final witness, Evelyn Carter. She stepped to the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The lead prosecutor paced slowly before asking, Miss Carter, do you have anything to add before sentencing? Evelyn looked straight at Garrett. The courtroom leaned in. She didn't speak with anger. She didn't raise her voice. She kept it simple. He didn't just erase my unit. He erased trust. He erased accountability. He gambled with lives for profit and power. But I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm here because this system needs to change. She looked toward the judge, then the jury. If this ends with him, nothing changes. It has to go further. There are more like him, and the ones we lost deserve more than just a headline. The judge nodded solemnly. Garrett's face tightened, but he said nothing. Hours later, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. Reporters sprinted from the courtroom to blast the headlines across the country. Garrett Maddox was led out in cuffs, head bowed but face still defiant. Evelyn didn't watch him leave. She stood and walked toward the exit, pushing through the crowd without looking back. Outside, Rachel and Marcus waited. Evelyn paused on the courthouse steps, glancing at the wall of reporters pressing forward. A young journalist broke through first. Miss Carter, what do you say to those still waiting for their own justice? Evelyn met his gaze. I say it's their turn to speak now. More hands shot up. More questions fired off. But Evelyn didn't stop. She walked down the steps toward the street where the real work was just beginning. The lake sat still under the weight of the late afternoon sun, its glassy surface broken only by the occasional ripple of wind brushing along the shoreline. The place looked exactly as Evelyn Carter remembered it, as if time had politely stepped around this cabin while the rest of the world moved on. She stood at the edge of the dock, hands deep in her coat pockets, breathing in the familiar mixture of damp wood and pine carried on the cold Virginia air. This was where Black Echo had gone when they had nowhere else to run. This cabin, owned under a shell company tied to Colonel Mendoza's private network, had been their off-the-book safe house. For years it had sat untouched, until today. The small parking area behind the cabin was full of battered old trucks and rented SUVs. 7 men and women, what remained of Black Echo, had gathered without cameras, without officials, without a single press badge in sight. Just them. Marcus Reed stood near the fire pit, flipping over a log with the heel of his boot, sending a swirl of ash into the air. He didn't say much. He never had to. Across from him sat Caleb Roach Henderson, who had lost 2 fingers on his left hand during an op in Eastern Europe but could still outshoot men half his age. Beside him, Darnell Smoke Booker leaned back with his arms crossed, the heavy scarring on the side of his neck a silent reminder of a mission gone sideways in Beirut. Next to Smoke sat Anna Trace Alvarez, once the sharpest tracker in the unit, now walking with a slight limp after spending the last decade working border rescues in Arizona. None of them had worn a uniform in years, but the bond between them had never gone anywhere. You could see it in the way they moved, the way they kept the perimeter in their peripheral vision, the way no one sat with their back to the door. Black Echo instincts didn't just fade with time, they settled in your bones. Rachel Carter sat a little off to the side, phone in hand, quietly observing but smart enough not to interrupt the rhythm of the reunion. Mendoza, now older and slower but still sharp as a razor, brought out an old cooler filled with beer and bottled water, setting it down without ceremony in the center of the group. "Still feels like a damn briefing," Smoke muttered under his breath. "Only thing missing is someone barking at us to move out in 5. The others chuckled quietly, the sound dry and cautious, like they weren't sure they remembered how to laugh without checking over their shoulders first. Marcus stood and walked toward the dock, stopping beside Evelyn. He didn't speak right away. He just watched the water with her, both of them standing shoulder to shoulder in silence. Finally, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, battered case. "Found something you'll want to see," he said. Evelyn took it, flipping open the latch with careful fingers. Inside sat a single digital tape. The label was cracked and faded, but she could still make out the words written in thick black marker. "Echo Team, Kandahar, downtime." "Where did you get this?" she asked, her throat tightening. "Old cash I thought was gone. Turns out Mendoza's network kept more than just our exit plans." Marcus nodded toward the cabin where Mendoza was setting up an old portable projector. "You ready?" Evelyn looked down at the tape again. She wasn't sure, but she nodded anyway. The group filed into the cabin, crowding around the blank wall as Mendoza powered up the ancient machine. The hum of the motor filled the quiet space. The footage flickered to life, shaky and grainy, but clear enough to recognize every face. There they were, Maria Delgado, James Wilson, Eric Hayes, all younger and alive in a way none of them had seen since the unit was dissolved. Maria danced barefoot in the dust, dragging James along with her, both of them laughing so hard they nearly collapsed. Eric stood by the edge of a cargo crate, mock scowling, arms crossed like he was too cool to join in, but smiling all the same. The camera panned awkwardly, landing on Marcus, who gave a mock salute to whoever was filming. And then it turned to Evelyn. She sat on a crate, head tilted back in laughter, carefree in a way that felt like it belonged to another life. The sound of it filled the cabin, real, alive, untouched by the weight that had come after. No one spoke as the footage played. The camera zoomed out, capturing the team in a loose circle, passing around a deck of cards, making bets on who could hit the furthest target with the worst sidearm. A blur of a hand waved across the lens before the screen went black. The projector whirred softly until Mendoza powered it down. For a long moment, no one moved. Evelyn turned away from the wall, swallowing hard. "That's what they tried to erase," she whispered. Marcus crossed his arms, watching her carefully. "We carry them. We always have. But they deserve more than that." The group slowly filtered back outside to the deck, leaving Evelyn and Marcus alone in the cabin. He leaned against the doorframe, looking toward the water. "You know this isn't over," he said quietly. "Maddox was just one of many. There are more who signed those orders, more who made sure we stayed buried." Evelyn nodded. "And they'll keep coming." Marcus pushed off the frame and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "So, what's next?" She didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, looking out at the water again. "I think I need to go back," she said softly. "Back where?" Marcus asked. Evelyn turned to face him. "Home?" Marcus furrowed his brow. "Mississippi?" Evelyn nodded. "I started something there. I need to finish it. I think that's where the next fight begins." He smiled, just slightly. "Not all fights need to end in blood, you know." Evelyn let out a quiet breath. "Maybe not, but they do need to end." She looked around the cabin one last time, then toward the group outside. "Let's go tell them." The door creaked open as they stepped back out onto the deck. The sun had dipped lower, casting the lake in shades of gold and orange. The team looked up as Evelyn approached. She stood in the center, glancing around at the faces that had followed her through hell and back. "You all came when I called," she started, voice steady. "We've carried this weight for too long, and we finally saw some of it lifted, but it's not done. Not yet." She looked toward the lake, then back to them. "I'm going home. There's something worth building there. Something that might keep the next generation from ending up like us. You're all welcome to join me. But if you don't, I understand." The group exchanged glances. Marcus nodded first. "I'll be there." Smoke cracked his knuckles. "You're not shaking me off that easy." Roach stood next, followed by Trace. One by one, they all nodded. They had followed her into the darkest parts of the world. None of them were about to let her face the next chapter alone. Evelyn smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "All right then, let's go home." The gates of Precision Elite looked different under new ownership. The towering steel arch still stood over the main entrance, but the flashy corporate banners were gone. Instead, a simple wooden sign hung beneath it, reading Veterans Marksmanship Academy. The new logo was subtle, a shield with crossed rifles, framed by the words discipline, responsibility, respect. Evelyn Carter parked her truck in the visitor's lot, cutting the engine and sitting quietly for a moment. It had been months since she had walked away from this place with the world watching her fail on a rigged stage. Now she had been invited back, not as a guest, not as a target, but as a teacher. The irony wasn't lost on her. Stepping out, she glanced toward the main building. The glass panels had been replaced with reinforced wood and steel accents, giving the place a more grounded, less corporate feel. The air smelled of fresh paint and cut lumber, like the place had been stripped down and rebuilt from the bones up. She adjusted her jacket and started walking toward the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing like before. Gone were the suits and champagne flutes. Instead, men and women in flannel shirts, utility vests, and work boots milled around, adjusting shooting stations, repairing equipment, and running safety drills. No one posed for cameras. No one whispered behind her back. The place had changed, and so had she. A man in his 50s approached her near the check-in counter. His handshake was firm, his face marked by years of sun and wind. "Miss Carter, I'm Greg Fallon, owner and lead instructor here now. Welcome back." Evelyn nodded. "Place looks different." Greg smiled. "We gutted every inch of it after Red Point collapsed. Started fresh, made it for the right reasons this time." He motioned toward the glass doors leading to the main range. "Mind taking a look?" Evelyn followed him through. The main range had been expanded, but it wasn't just about distance anymore. There were sections marked for youth training, law enforcement practice, and veteran rehabilitation programs. A separate area had been dedicated to community workshops, with banners reading, "Safety first, always." Greg stopped beside a workstation near the observation deck. "We've had dozens of veterans come through since we reopened," he explained. "But we've never had anyone like you. The team thought it was time these shooters learned from someone who lived what most only hear about in stories." Evelyn glanced around. "You sure they're ready for that?" Greg's grin widened. "Are you?" She thought about it for a moment, then nodded once. "Let's do it." Within an hour, word spread through the facility that Whisper herself would be leading the afternoon's advanced marksmanship seminar. Students ranging from young cadets to retired officers gathered near the primary range, setting up chairs in a loose semicircle. The energy in the air felt different from the last time she had stood on this ground. There was no arrogance, no smirks waiting for her to fail, just anticipation. Greg introduced her briefly, keeping it simple. No inflated titles, no long-winded speeches, just respect. Evelyn stepped forward, scanning the group. Her voice was calm, steady. "You've probably read things about me," she started. "Heard stories, seen headlines. Some of it's true, most of it isn't. But none of that matters here. What matters is what you do when you pick up that rifle." She motioned toward the targets downrange. "You've trained for precision. You've practiced your breathing, your stance, your timing. But I'm here to teach you the one thing every shooter carries with them long after the bullet leaves the barrel." She let the silence stretch. "Responsibility." A few heads nodded, the crowd leaning in. "Anyone can pull a trigger," she continued. "Anyone can hit a target if they practice long enough. But it takes discipline to ask yourself why you're taking that shot, what comes after, who it impacts, whether it's worth it." She stepped toward the nearest table and picked up a standard issue 308 rifle. "You don't carry this for glory. You don't carry it to impress anyone. You carry it because you're responsible for every ounce of damage it can cause. Out there, that responsibility doesn't end when you squeeze the trigger. It starts." Evelyn paused, letting the words settle over the group. "So, before you line up that next shot, ask yourself one thing. What are you standing for? What are you protecting? What price are you willing to pay for being the one who pulls that trigger?" She set the rifle back down and turned toward the silent audience. "That's what I came here to teach." Greg stepped forward again, giving her a nod of thanks. The room erupted in applause. Not the polite kind she remembered from corporate showcases, but something quieter, deeper, more real. After the seminar, students lined up to shake her hand, thanking her not just for the lesson, but for what she had done for every soldier who had ever served in silence. Rachel stood off to the side, capturing moments with her phone, but never pushing in too close. She knew Evelyn didn't do this for headlines. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Greg invited Evelyn to join him and the staff for dinner in the facility's community hall. It was a simple meal: barbecue, cornbread, iced tea, no formal speeches, no staged photos, just people sharing stories. Evelyn found herself sitting across from a young woman named Tasha, a former Marine sniper who had recently transitioned into civilian life. Tasha leaned in, her voice low. "I used to think the hardest part was leaving the field. Turns out the hardest part is figuring out who you are when no one's giving you orders anymore." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's when you have to decide what you stand for without the mission telling you who to be." Tasha smiled. Thanks for reminding us it's okay to keep standing. Greg raised his glass toward Evelyn. To the ones who carried the weight, so the rest of us could keep learning. Glasses clinked softly around the room. Evelyn didn't raise hers. She just nodded in quiet acknowledgement. After dinner, Rachel pulled her aside. You know, they want to feature this in the memorial coverage next week, right? They're calling it Whisper's Legacy. Evelyn sighed but didn't argue. Let them. As long as they get it right. Rachel smiled. They will. Evelyn stepped outside, standing alone under the stars. She knew the cameras would find her again soon. She knew the nation would keep watching. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying it alone. The next morning, Greg handed her an official invitation to the National Memorial Dedication Ceremony scheduled for the following week. They want you front and center, he said. Evelyn took the envelope, weighing it in her hand. Guess it's time to finish what we started. The sun broke through the thin winter clouds as hundreds gathered at Arlington National Cemetery. The chill in the air didn't keep anyone away. Veterans in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder with civilians. Families who had lost their loved ones in operations no one had dared speak about for decades held each other close. Reporters lined the outer edge of the ceremony grounds, cameras ready but silent for once, knowing the weight of what they were about to witness. At the center of it all stood the Black Echo Memorial, a solid black granite wall stretching 20 feet wide and standing 7 feet tall. Its surface was polished like glass, reflecting the crowd that had come to see it unveiled. Every name on the wall had once been erased from official history. Now they were carved into stone, permanent, unquestionable. Evelyn Carter stood in the front row with Rachel at her side, Marcus Reed to her left, and the rest of Black Echo, what remained of them, filling in behind. She wore a simple black coat, no medals, no military insignia, just herself, a woman who had carried the weight of silence for too long. The ceremony began with a moment of silence. The master of ceremonies, a senior Pentagon official, spoke briefly about service, sacrifice, and the cost of secrecy. But everyone in that field knew why they were really there. This wasn't just about closing a chapter. It was about rewriting the truth. Senator Lauren Bennett took the podium next, holding a folded piece of paper but barely glancing at it. For too long, we asked these men and women to serve in shadows, she said, her voice steady. We denied their existence to protect politics, to shield reputations, to avoid questions we were too afraid to answer. Today, we stop hiding. She turned toward Evelyn, catching her eye. Today, we honor them. The cover was pulled back from the wall, revealing the names etched in perfect lines. Maria Delgado, James Wilson, Eric Hayes, dozens of others. The air seemed to hold its breath as people stepped forward to lay flowers, medals, and tokens at the base of the memorial. Evelyn's hands tightened around something in her pocket. The same bullet Marcus had left in her mailbox months ago, the bullet that had started it all. Rachel leaned in. You ready? Evelyn nodded. Without a word, she stepped forward, her boots crunching softly on the frost-covered grass. She knelt at the base of the wall, tracing the names of her team with trembling fingers. Then, carefully, she placed the bullet on the cold stone, pressing it firmly into the small groove between two engraved names, Maria and James. She stood, stepping back to face the crowd. For a moment, the weight of every choice, every loss, every lie pressed down on her like a mountain. But when she spoke, her voice cut through the silence like a blade. They called us ghosts, she began. They told the world we didn't exist. They buried our names, our records, our lives. But they forgot something. She looked out at the faces watching her, veterans standing at attention, families clutching photographs of loved ones long gone. They forgot that the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It rises. It fights its way back into the light. And today, you're standing in front of proof that no lie lasts forever. She took a step closer to the wall, laying her hand flat against the cold granite. These names aren't just etched in stone. They're a promise that no one who carries the weight of service in silence will ever be forgotten again. The wind stirred around her, carrying her words across the field. She turned back to the crowd, locking eyes with the cameras that would carry her message far beyond Arlington. So, I leave you with this question. What would you fight for if the world erased your existence? What truth matters enough to break your silence? She paused, letting the words settle deep, because somewhere out there, someone is still being told to stay quiet. Someone is still being told they don't matter. And you, every single one of you, can be the voice that refuses to let them disappear. The applause started quietly, then built like a wave crashing over the crowd. Veterans raised their fists. Families wept openly. Reporters lowered their cameras, some brushing tears from their eyes. The ceremony ended, but no one moved right away. People lingered, walking the length of the wall, tracing names with their fingers, leaving behind tokens of remembrance. Rachel stood beside Evelyn, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You did it," she whispered. Evelyn nodded slowly. "We did it." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn stood alone at the wall one last time. She traced Maria's name, then James's, her breath fogging in the cold air. She didn't need to speak. They knew. Marcus approached quietly from behind. "They're going to build a scholarship in their names," he said, "for kids who want to serve but don't have the means. Fully funded. National." Evelyn smiled softly. "Good." Marcus paused. "And there's talk of a permanent exhibit at the National Archives. Black Echo, the real story." Evelyn turned, meeting his eyes. "Let them tell it. All of it." Marcus nodded, stepping back to give her space. She turned back to the wall, resting her forehead against the cold stone. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carried away by the wind. When she finally walked away, she didn't look back. She didn't have to. The ghosts had names now, and their story would never be erased again. There is a truth few people ever understand about silence. It is not empty. It is not weightless. Silence is a burden. It carries every untold story, every erased name, every moment when the world decided someone's existence was easier to deny than to face. Evelyn Carter had lived in that silence for most of her life. She had worn it like armor, convincing herself that her invisibility was service in itself, that the best kind of soldier was the one no one remembered. But standing before the Black Echo Memorial, hearing the name spoken aloud after decades of denial, something inside her finally settled. The ghosts were no longer trapped in her memory alone. They had been returned to the world. It was a victory, but not the kind most people dream about. It didn't come with medals or promotions. It didn't come with a parade or a celebration. It came with scars, with losses that could never be undone. It came with the weight of knowing how many more stories like theirs had never been told and might never be. In the weeks following the dedication ceremony, Evelyn found herself reflecting on every step that had brought her to that moment. From the dusty back porch in Mississippi, where her grandfather had first placed a rifle in her hands, to the frozen forests where she had evaded AI drones designed to erase her once and for all. From whispered orders given in the dark halls of military bases, to the bright lights of a courtroom where the truth had finally found its voice. What she had learned was painfully simple. Power fears exposure more than defeat. It is easier for systems to erase people than to confront their mistakes. And the ones erased are often those who carry the greatest truths. Evelyn knew she had been lucky. She had survived long enough to reclaim her name, to carve it into stone alongside those she had lost. But she also knew that for every Evelyn Carter, there were hundreds more who would never get that chance. People erased by governments, corporations, institutions too afraid to face what they had done. People whose stories would never make headlines or be immortalized on walls. That reality weighed on her more than any bullet she had ever carried. It would have been easy to walk away after the trial, to let the world move on, to retreat into the quiet life she had once tried to build. But she couldn't. Not now, not when she knew how much work remained. She returned to Mississippi not as a ghost, but as a mentor. She stood in front of classrooms filled with wide-eyed kids holding rifles for the first time, teaching them the same lesson her grandfather had once taught her, that a weapon is not power, it is responsibility, that the true measure of strength is knowing when not to pull the trigger. She trained them to breathe, to steady their hands, to trust their judgment. But more than that, she taught them to ask the hard questions. Why am I here? Who am I protecting? What comes after? The program grew faster than she expected. Word spread through military circles, law enforcement, community centers. Veterans showed up to volunteer. Survivors of forgotten units reached out, offering to share their stories. Families who had lost loved ones in classified operations came forward, seeking answers they had been denied for years. Evelyn didn't have all the answers, but she listened, and sometimes listening was enough. The government's investigations continued, uncovering more about the network of corruption Garrett Maddox had built. New laws were passed to protect whistleblowers, to hold defense contractors accountable, to ensure that no one could ever again create a unit like Black Echo without oversight. But Evelyn knew the system would never fix itself completely. The fight for truth was never about a single law or a single courtroom victory. It was about people, about the choice to keep asking questions, to keep digging, to keep refusing to accept the easy narrative. It was about standing up when it would be easier to stay silent, about risking everything for people who might never know your name. That was the lesson she carried now, and it was the lesson she hoped others would carry long after she was gone. One evening, as the sun set over the fields where she had first learned to shoot, Rachel joined her on the porch of the old family house. They sat in quiet for a while, sipping coffee, watching the sky turn gold and violet. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "Do you ever wish you had just stayed in the shadows?" Evelyn considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "It would have been easier." Rachel nodded slowly. "But you didn't." Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, I didn't." Rachel leaned back, staring up at the stars beginning to appear. "You changed more than you know. You gave people a reason to speak up." Evelyn shook her head softly. "I didn't give them anything they didn't already have. I just reminded them they weren't alone." The two women sat in silence again, the weight of all they had seen settling between them. After a while, Rachel asked, "What comes next?" Evelyn glanced toward the small training range behind the house, where the next group of students would gather in the morning. "We keep going," she said, "one story at a time." She stood, stretching her back, feeling every year of her life settle into her bones. "And we never stop asking the only question that ever mattered." Rachel looked up, already knowing what was coming. Evelyn turned toward her, the firelight catching the silver in her hair. "What would you fight for if the world erased your existence?" Rachel stood, nodding. "And what truth matters enough to break your silence?" Evelyn smiled. "Exactly." The two women walked inside, leaving the porch light burning behind them. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Evelyn Carter wasn't fighting alone. Long after the headlines faded, after the courtroom cameras turned away, after the memorial ceremonies ended, life did not return to normal, because there was no normal to return to. What Evelyn Carter had done What her team had fought for was never about closing a chapter. It was about forcing the world to confront something most people spend their whole lives trying to ignore: the uncomfortable truth that systems are built to forget people. That power prefers silence over accountability. That the ones who carry the greatest weight are often the easiest to abandon when the narrative no longer serves those at the top. In the months that followed the unveiling of the Black Echo Memorial, the nation's attention shifted, as it always does. New scandals, new debates, new headlines. But beneath the surface, something had changed. Evelyn could feel it. She saw it in the veterans who showed up at her small training range, not looking for fame, but looking for purpose. She heard it in the late-night phone calls from whistleblowers she had never met, men and women who had spent years sitting on truths they had been too afraid to release into the world. She read it in the letters that flooded her mailbox, letters from young soldiers, retired officers, and civilians alike, people who had never worn a uniform but had carried their own silences, survivors of workplace harassment, victims of wrongful imprisonment, families of the disappeared, all writing to say the same thing in different words. I thought I was alone. Evelyn kept every single one of those letters in a wooden box on her nightstand, not because she needed the recognition, but because she knew how much courage it took to send them. Every word was a reminder that the fight for truth wasn't just a military battle. It was human, universal. It crossed every boundary of race, gender, class, and creed. It lived in the quiet rooms where people debated whether speaking up was worth the cost. It lived in the hesitation before hitting send on an email. It lived in the breath someone held before standing up to say, "That's not right." Evelyn knew what that cost felt like. She had paid it for years. She had lost friends, lost trust, lost time. But the thing about carrying weight is that you eventually learn you're strong enough to bear it. And when others see you carry it, they start to believe they can too. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch watching the next group of trainees line up on the small practice range, Rachel joined her with a stack of printed emails. "These keep coming," Rachel said, setting them on the table. Evelyn didn't even glance at them. "They will, for a while." Rachel leaned against the railing, scanning the field. "Do you ever wonder if you'll be remembered the way you actually were? Not the headlines, not the whispers, the real you." Evelyn smiled faintly. "No one ever is. Not really. All we leave behind are the parts of ourselves we're brave enough to share." Rachel nodded slowly. "And what if the system tries to bury it all again?" Evelyn stood, stretching her legs. "Then we dig it back up, again and again, as many times as it takes. Because that was the real legacy. Not the wall of names, not the courtroom verdicts, not even the book Rachel had published. The real legacy was in the hands of the people who refused to let silence win. The young girl in Mississippi learning to breathe steady before pulling a trigger. The whistleblower in Washington drafting an anonymous letter to Congress. The veteran halfway across the country teaching their own kids what it means to stand for something. The weight didn't belong to Evelyn alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who picked it up and carried it forward. A year after the memorial dedication, the government announced the creation of a national archive for erased military operations. It wasn't perfect. Many files remained classified. Many names stayed redacted. But it was a start, a public acknowledgement that history could not be shaped by convenience alone. Evelyn was invited to speak at the opening ceremony, but she declined. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew her presence would turn the focus back on her. And the truth was bigger than one person. Instead, she watched the broadcast from her living room, Rachel sitting beside her, Marcus on the other end of a conference call. When the camera panned across the names being added to the archive's first permanent exhibit, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. They had broken the silence. and it had echoed further than she ever imagined. Later that night, Rachel turned to her. "Do you think people will forget again?" Evelyn took a long breath. "People always forget. That's why we have to keep reminding them." Rachel nodded. "And what happens when we're gone?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She stood, walking to the bookshelf where Rachel's book, Whisper in the Wind, sat between worn military manuals and faded family photos. She picked it up, thumbing through the pages. "We leave something behind," she finally said. "Something that makes them remember they were never supposed to forget in the first place." The next morning, Evelyn packed up her old truck with supplies for the training range. As she strapped down the last of the equipment, Rachel approached with her laptop in hand. "I've been thinking about starting a podcast," Rachel said, half joking but half serious. "A space for people to share the stories they're afraid to tell anywhere else." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready to carry that weight?" Rachel smiled. "I learned from the best." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Then do it, and make sure you ask them the only question that matters." Rachel nodded, already knowing what she meant. "What would you fight for if the world erased your existence?" Evelyn tapped the side of the truck. "Exactly." As they drove toward the range, the early morning sun lit up the fields of Mississippi. The road stretched ahead, long and open, the horizon wide with possibility, and though Evelyn knew the fight would never truly be over, she also knew something else. Somewhere out there, someone was waiting for permission to speak. Someone was waiting to be reminded they weren't invisible. Someone was waiting to hear that their story mattered. And Evelyn Carter would keep making sure they heard it. Again, and again, and again, until silence was no longer the default, until every erased name had a place on the record, until every hidden truth stood in the light. Because the weight we carry is heavy, but it's never heavier than our capacity to bear it, together. Evelyn Carter's fight may have ended in public view, but the questions she left behind now belong to all of us. How many stories are still waiting to be told? How many lives have been erased without a trace? If this story made you think about the cost of silence and the power of truth, we want to hear from you. What would you fight for if the world tried to erase your existence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.